I told the Defense Department wanted to shoot it down as soon as it was appropriate. They concluded we should not shoot it down over land. It was not a serious threat, and we should wait till it got across the water.
They just shot it.
You just shot it, right?
Yeah.
President Biden's decision to shoot down over the coast of South Carolina what the U.S. says was a Chinese surveillance balloon has been met with accusations and warnings of further responses by China amid rising diplomatic tensions between Beijing and Washington. Hello and welcome to Inside America with me, Ghida Fakhry. The United States and China have traded accusations over what the White House says was a Chinese spy balloon flying in U.S. airspace to gather sensitive military information, and what Beijing maintains was an unmanned civilian balloon used for weather data gathering. The balloon, which was first detected over Alaskan airspace on January 28th, was shot down by U.S. fighter jets on February 4th. While China accused the United States of, quote, a clear overreaction and a serious violation of international practice, Washington defended its decision to shoot down the balloon, saying its presence in U.S. airspace amounted to, quote, an irresponsible act and a clear violation of U.S. sovereignty.
The United States will continue to maintain open lines of communication with China, including to address this ongoing incident. Indeed, that's why we need direct and regular communications in the first place. And that's why it's critical that such lines remain open at all times to help avoid miscalculation and conflict.
The U.S. Secretary of State canceled a recently planned visit to Beijing as reports of the balloon first came out. Senior Pentagon officials confirmed that similar suspected Chinese balloons had entered U.S. airspace at least 3 times during the Trump administration and once earlier in the Biden administration. So why did the United States decide to act this time? And how will these latest diplomatic tensions between the world's 2 most powerful nations be mitigated? Joining me now to discuss this is Heino Klink. He was Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for East Asia from 2019 to 2021. Secretary Klink, the US and US officials have accused China of flying a surveillance balloon over the United States. Now, in a world of advanced surveillance technology, of drones and satellites, why would any country use a balloon to spy?
Well, I think it's just one additional piece of the Chinese surveillance state's arsenal. Surveillance balloons allow you to linger over certain targets. Satellites don't linger. They rotate the Earth at various rates of speed, so the Chinese could theoretically linger over particular strategic sites. We understand that this balloon was in fact steerable, maneuverable, so I would imagine that that's exactly what the Chinese intent was.
But if it is indeed a spy balloon, wouldn't the Chinese maybe have done more to conceal it, say a sky blue rather than a white balloon? I mean, China says this was a weather balloon gone astray, like many before it. Obviously, one side is playing with the truth.
So I think the Chinese Communist regime does not have the best track record when it comes to the truth, to be perfectly frank. I think that it was, in fact, a surveillance balloon, and when the United States recovers the payload from this aircraft, I think the facts will bear that out. The Chinese have been overtly aggressive in their collection of intelligence through a variety of means, not just against the United States, but against other countries as well.
But the U.S. does it all the time, though. Isn't that the case? The U.S. spies on China and so many other countries all the time, 24/7. It has the most sophisticated aerial surveillance system in the world.
So states do, in fact, engage in espionage against one another, absolutely. There's a difference, though, in violating a country's airspace and doing it so blatantly as the Chinese did.
We know that for decades, the U.S. has used planes along the Chinese coast and sometimes over China's airspace to spy on China. We know these planes can spy deep into China without necessarily violating its airspace. Would the U.S. tolerate Chinese planes at the edge of its airspace?
So I would push back. First of all, U.S. Operations have been limited to international air and sea space. And as a matter of fact, U.S. operations often in support of United Nations sanctions against North Korea and other countries have actually been intercepted dangerously by Chinese aircraft. So the U.S. and its partners and allies operate in international airspace and international waters. If the Chinese or any other country wanted to operate its vessels in international waters that are close to U.S. territory, the United States would not have an issue with that. In fact, the Chinese have done that. The Chinese have had intelligence collection ships off the coast of California, off the coast of Hawaii, and also monitoring American military activities in other parts of the world. That's not an issue. The difference with the balloon is it entered American airspace, and by international law, that is an egregious violation.
But again, we know from U.S. officials, whether they've gone on the record or not, and it's been widely reported here in the United States, that it was not the first time a balloon was spotted over U.S. territory. It happened at least 3 times, we're told, during the Trump administration, and once at least early on in the Biden administration. Why take this aggressive stance now?
Well, I can't comment on reported allegations of it having occurred previously. So let's focus on the most recent events, because the balloon was in the sky for ordinary citizens to see. If I were still in government, I would have advocated for bringing the balloon down earlier. It should have been brought down as soon as it entered U.S. airspace over the Aleutian Islands. It could have been brought down actually over Canadian airspace as well.
Should it have been brought down over Alaska, which is a sparsely populated area?
I think that there should have been ample opportunity to have been brought it down either over other waters or over, as you said, sparsely populated terrain, whether it was over the U.S. or over Canada for that matter.
So why wasn't it done? Because one has the feeling that that action was only taken once the media began to report this.
That could, in fact, be the case. I think that the Biden administration was somewhat forced into acknowledging this incursion when, again, private citizens and a local newspaper in the state of Montana reported this. No sovereign country can allow a foreign country's aircraft to linger over its airspace without permission.
The same goes for the United States. Does the U.S. request permission?
It's certainly not the case, again, in recent memory. That's the difference. The Chinese act in a reckless manner in international waters. Our operations, as well as that of other countries, have always been in international waters and airspace, never impacting the sovereignty of China.
What does this balloon story tell us about the state of Sino-American relations? Because the latest reports from the Pentagon consider China to be the U.S.'s main adversary. Are we inching closer toward military confrontation? Is the U.S. preparing for one over Taiwan?
So I certainly hope we're not getting closer to military confrontation. I think what it indicates is that deterrence is fragile. And if you look at, for instance, the precipitous American withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021, the fact that the West was unable to deter the Russian invasion of Ukraine just last year, we have to ensure that we strengthen deterrence so that aggressive countries such as China do not take any action that would destabilize the region, including against Taiwan.
But at the end of the day, Taiwan seems to be a good pretext for the United States to try to contain China in the Pacific. We've talked a lot about NATO's expansion towards Russia. In the Pacific, though, it's the U.S. that is encircling China by building this arc of bases around its coastline. What is at stake seems to be the U.S. trying to achieve a certain level of hegemony in that region to preserve its own place in the Pacific. Isn't that really what's at stake here?
So I would not agree with that characterization. American relations with a number of countries in the region have been long-standing. We have treaty alliances with a variety of countries, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Thailand, and others. So American military presence there is based on sovereign countries agreeing that it's in our mutual interests.
But is it in their mutual interest? I mean,
I would certainly argue that
it's more in the interest of the United States, let's face it.
I think it's a mutually beneficial relationship. And I think if you look at the world that was, in essence, created after World War II, the international rules-based order that was created after World War II has benefited all countries, including China, quite frankly.
All right, Heino Klink, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for East Asia under the Trump administration. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, the Biden administration has secured access to 4 new military bases in the Philippines as it continues its efforts to confront what it says is the growing Chinese threat in the Asia-Pacific region. The agreement with the Philippines government was sealed during a recent visit to Manila by the U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin.
I just want to be clear that we're not seeking permanent basing in the Philippines. Our goal is and always has been to promote greater security and stability throughout the region.
The U.S. already had access to 5 military bases in the Southeast Asian country under a 2014 Defense Cooperation Agreement, which was passed by the previous government of Rodrigo Duterte, who came to power in 2016, promising to move his country closer to China and away from the United States, which ruled the Philippines as a territory for nearly 50 years after it was ceded by Spain. The U.S. will now have access to 9 military bases in the Philippines for its increased military deployment, with 3 reportedly located near Taiwan. The Philippines is the largest recipient of U.S. military assistance in the Indo-Pacific region. Since 2015, the United States has delivered more than $1 billion worth of planes, armored vehicles, small arms, and other military equipment and training to the Philippines. In a reversal of his predecessor's policy, the current president of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., has made clear his views of the U.S.'s role in the region.
Our longest partner and ally has been the United States. And as we traverse these rather troubled waters, geopolitical waters, economic waters that we are facing, I again put great importance on that partnership, specifically with the United States.
How will these latest efforts to expand Washington's military alliances in the region affect the tense relationship between the two great rivals, the United States and China? Joining me now to discuss this is Harry Thomas, who served as U.S. Ambassador to the Philippines between 2010 and 2013. Ambassador Thomas, while the whole balloon saga was playing out here in the United States, away from the headlines, the Biden administration was making a deal with the government of the Philippines to use 4 additional military bases, reportedly some of them on the main Philippine island called Luzon, which is closest to Taiwan. How significant was this agreement?
The Enhanced Defense Cooperation Act was implemented and increased by Secretary of Defense Austin along with his Philippine counterpart. And that is to respond to humanitarian crises. The Philippines is beset by 20 hurricanes, monsoons a year, typhoons. So our being able to better train them to respond will be important. The climate change has caused the typhoons to change location. So we want them to be able to better respond to that while also enhancing their capabilities to any other challenges that the future may present.
Is this more about the U.S. being able to confront and contain China in the South China Sea in the Pacific than it is about enhancing the region's own security?
The Philippines is our oldest treaty partner in Asia. We have a mutual defense treaty, which we respect. But the Philippines has taken China to UN for the Law of the Sea Treaty because they're concerned about the Western Philippine Sea by illegal fishing by China and other nations.
But let's face it, though, Ambassador, you mentioned the Mutual Defense Treaty, but this isn't really about mutual defense, is it? The Philippines isn't going to come to the rescue of the United States or react if the U.S. were to be attacked. This is really about the U.S. enhancing its own grip on the Philippines, isn't it?
The last thing anyone wants to see is a war or kinetic action. The best defense is a strong offense. So working and training with our Philippine as well as other partners in the Asian theater to make us all stronger is important. The Philippines does not want to be dependent on the United States. They want to be a partner of the United States. And that's what we're trying to do. As you know, we have given the Philippines 3 large ships. They're the largest ships in their Navy. We've enhanced their Coast Guard ability. And we want people who are not dependent, but are real partners in Asia. And I know that's what the Filipinos would like.
Well, you say you want countries that are real partners, but we know that ASEAN countries, including the Philippines, recently said that they want to make sure that they are dependent on themselves, that they can solve their own problems, that they don't take any sides in any rivalry between the two superpowers, the US and China. But isn't that exactly what the Filipino government has done, given a military edge to the United States over China?
No, Ghida, I would disagree. I think the Philippines and other ASEAN countries want to have excellent relations with all of the nations, including their larger trading partners, which are China, Japan, and the United States. President Marcos has visited Beijing, and President Biden has invited President Marcos to the White House. This is about the Philippines and other Asian countries, and especially in ASEAN, charting their own course. This is not a neo-colonial. This is to work with our partners.
What benefit are these countries deriving? Because it doesn't seem like it's a mutually beneficial agreement. If anything, it is giving, again, the United States access to all these additional military bases so close to Taiwan, which is a really important flashpoint.
These are rotating access. We are not having or seeking bases at all. That's not something that Filipino people want, and we respect their wishes and their democracy. What we're trying to do is work with them. During my tenure, when we had typhoons, we had to bring in the US Navy. We had to bring in USAID, and we'll always do that. But I think the Filipinos want to be able to respond quickly and correctly to their own challenges on their own, as other ASEAN nations want to do. They want to combat illegal fishing, whether it be from China or other nations, on their own. And they want to be able to respond to any other challenges on their own. But that's going to require training and modernization. And that's what we hope to bring. And we're not trying to be hegemons.
So why is the United States taking it upon itself, not just to build up its military presence, to strike agreements, mutual defense agreements with some of the countries when there are such growing tensions with China, and there have been for decades. And we know that the region can rely on its collective security mechanisms, not to mention international institutions and legal frameworks that exist.
I don't think it is just up to the U.S., Ghida. These are democracies. The Philippines is a democracy. It's charting its own course. Philippines invited the U.S. to train with it, to assist its development, and we will continue to do that wherever we are requested. If we are not requested, we will leave, as happened in the Philippines before.
The Chinese Navy, it is now larger than the US Navy in terms of vessels, not in terms of firepower. It's a matter of time before China gains the upper hand, isn't it? At least on paper, particularly given that the US Navy is split between the Atlantic and the Pacific, whereas the Chinese Navy is essentially at home. Can the US really fight on these two fronts and prevail?
Ghida, the United States has the finest military in the world, but no one wants to go to war. We want to have peace, security, enhanced trade. The Philippines would like to improve its economy, especially coming out of COVID, where they, thanks to President Marcos and his allies, their economy grew by 7%. They want to increase bilateral trade. One of the largest immigrant groups to the United States, playing a tremendous role in our bilateral relations, are Filipino Americans. So this is about peace and security, and the way you do that is to make sure you have an outstanding defense. But I am very proud that we have the finest military in the world.
You say no one is interested in going to war. Why then is the United States pursuing what seems to be a military overreach policy in the region? Because it is planning to station naval, air, and missile forces near Taiwan, not just China's backyard, but this flashpoint. The question is, who is threatening whom, and are we likely then to move into a collision course between these two major powers, these two naval powers, the US and China?
Ghida, I would never be one to try to predict the future, but I will say that we are a large donor to Asian countries, particularly the Philippines. If you look at our bilateral aid, the largest part is not defense, it is health, then education, and followed by agriculture in all sectors. And that's what we're trying to do. The Philippines would like to become one of the Asian tigers economically, and they're asking their oldest partner, the United States, to assist them. And that is what we want, and that's what we want with all of our other ASEAN partners as well as Asian partners.
But could this strategy, though, lead to a hot war with China as a means to weaken it both economically and militarily? Because the US, we know, is pumping some of these Asian countries with weapons. What is the end game here for the United States?
China is one of our larger trading partners also. The United States does not want to see kinetic action, as I have said. When we have assisted the Philippines, if you look at it closely, and this is open source information, most of our military assistance has not just been in training, but in enhancing their ability to respond to humanitarian crises. They and Indonesia average 20 to 24 typhoons a year. Climate change has made this worse. The last typhoon ruined the onion crop. That may sound trite, but now onions are $15 per kilo. They are the largest importer of rice in the world. We want to help them become economically independent and chart their own course. That's only what an ally would do.
Sure, but is this best done through military bases?
These are not bases. As I said, this is rotating projects. That's what the Philippine government says. That's what they want. These are not permanent stations at all. Those days are gone with the Philippines. That's not what the Filipino people want.
Let me ask you this, Ambassador. Last October, in its latest National Security Strategy report, the U.S. said its top global priority is, quote, outcompeting China and constraining Russia. But can the U.S. take on both China and Russia simultaneously while providing weapons and military assistance to Ukraine and still achieve its paramount goal of outcompeting China?
This is not going to be a repeat of World War II, where you let aggressors take over other European countries. I think that is something that we should applaud, and I do as an individual. And I think, as I said before, we want to assist treaty partners throughout Asia and the world, be strong economic and democracies, partners in trade, partners in immigration also. And that's our goal.
Harry Thomas, former U.S. ambassador to the Philippines, thank you so much for being with me.
Take care. Bye-bye.
While here in the United States, the news cycle was largely dominated by the white, high-altitude Chinese balloon, which Washington claims was spying on sensitive U.S. military installations, and Beijing maintains was a weather balloon gone astray. This episode illustrates the tense climate between the two military powers. Once the balloon was spotted by American sky watchers and made it into the news cycle, it became a political problem for President Biden, unlike previous Chinese balloons, which were reportedly undisclosed to the American public. This balloon incident, which would have been rather amusing under different circumstances, eclipsed a far more critical development: the deal Washington struck with the Philippines to get access to 4 new military bases, most of them reportedly located on the main island of Luzon, the Philippines' closest territory to Taiwan, just 250 kilometers north, and where the United States already maintains 2 bases. And so, in short, while the balloon is no longer there, the arc of US naval and air assets around China, from South Korea, Japan, Australia, all the way to Singapore, has now been strengthened by Washington's new military agreement with Manila. The United States' drive to contain and possibly deter China from asserting its sovereignty over Taiwan, now, if not in the future, seems to be a race against time. What happens next begs a few questions. Are the world's 2 largest nuclear navies on a collision course? Can the US take on 2 adversaries at once, China and Russia? Can it afford to open another front? And, as tragically disheartening as it is, has anything been learned from the ongoing war in Ukraine? From me, Ghida, Fakhry, and the team here in Washington, thanks for watching.